Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean, and today we are talking about Humanity, which is designed by Yoann Levet and published by Bombyx, who did provide us with this review copy, but the thoughts in this video are all our own.
Humanity is a resource management tile placement game in which you are astronauts setting up a base on Titan, the largest moon of Saturn. But let's not get too much into it now. Let's take a closer look at how it plays. You start the game with a small collection of buildings, a bit of rubble that will need to be cleared, and a few astronauts. Each turn you can do one of two things. Either turn an astronaut at your base to gain resources. So, for example, this level 2 astronaut could get you 1 ice and 1 food, aka bugs. Or you can place an astronaut on any space of the market and pay the cost for either the module or the experiment at that space. If it's a module, place it in a space your astronaut came from. If it's an experiment, gain its benefit and place it with your other experiments. Benefits will let you do things like moving up the science track, resetting the astronauts at your base, or moving your astronauts in the market closer to the arm. This last one is important because after each round, a couple of modules are discarded, and then the arm is moved clockwise, and any astronauts that end up on or behind it get to come back to your base. You keep doing this until there are no more modules of the current era left to refill the market, and then you check the science track, and players gain secret game end points according to their position. You do all of this again for a total of 3 eras, gaining points along the way for buildings, connecting experiments together, and the 3 shared goal tiles. And then, when the last draw pile is empty, you also get a few points for your leftover resources and reveal your secret science points. And then the head of the Titan Science Department is named.
So let's kick this off by talking about the components, because the components are phenomenal in this game. Like, every part of this is so nice. The people, these little astronaut people are amazing looking, and everything works so well too. Like, they've really thought about what it does. Like this little tile wheel, because you slide this tile arm around and then that decides when you pick up people. But it's such a great market mechanism, and then it works so nicely because this is just inset a little bit and all of the art is so nice and clear. There's no part of the presentation that I don't like.
Yeah, it does work really nicely functionally. The fit of it is just so smooth. Mm-hmm. And the tiles all are really clear, but they look good too. Like when you are building out your base, all the different colors and even like the different shapes of the buildings, that all looks really nice as well. And it's just really amazing with like the rule.
Yeah, the rule book is ridiculous.
Yeah, this is incredible. So this copy was in French. So all of our stuff is in French, but it has like real science stuff and pictures and stories behind each of the individual like astronauts that you are.
Yeah, and then all of the science background to like what would happen if we actually did a trip to Titan, and how would we actually set that up, and how are these different resources work, and all of that is tied into the game too. This is a fairly simple game. So the rule set to this is fairly simple. So don't expect that you're doing like every step of a trip to Saturn. This isn't like Vitel Lacerda's like on Mars kind of thing. But you definitely get like a bit of the sense of it, and that the resources are stuff like it's electricity, water, and then food, but food is bugs, because food would be bugs, which I have a hard time with, but I understand it.
Yeah, and other tiles that you start off with are these obstacle tiles that look like craters. And even for those ones, between the 4 different players, those all look different as well. And I play yellow, which unfortunately has the more boring version of it, but I do appreciate that they look different. And then as you're building out your base, it all fits together so nicely. And when you have all 4 of them and you can put the 1 point token in, again, that's such a perfect fit.
So let's talk a little bit more about the actually playing the game and kind of the strategies and how it plays outside of the literal how it plays. And it has some interesting mechanics, like this little market system of when you put down your guy, this arm swings around a certain amount depending on how many of these clear out. But the big thing is if if a few of these are gone and your guy is a bit too far and this swings around, you don't get them back for the next round. And that's a big thing about deciding, do I want to take one that's far away but I really need? Or do I want to take one that's close enough that I'm going to pick up that guy and then have 3 workers for the next round?
Yeah, if you're 1 worker short, you really miss out because you won't be able to use them to get the resources or use them to send them out again. But you're often competing with the other players for the tiles. So it could be worth going really far. And you might get lucky because if everyone is going out, or in 2-player game, if 2 astronauts are going out and getting tiles, that means that arm is actually going to swing quite a bit more, that you might be able to go pretty far and still come back if enough tiles are purchased. So there is a lot to consider for which tile you want, knowing that your astronaut might also be left there.
And one thing that can help you as well in that decision is that some of these science experiments, they let you move your guys back on this track as well. So if you can time things right, you can go a little bit further, then buy one of the experiments and then move yourself backwards so that you get picked up by the arm. And that can be a really satisfying combo.
Yeah, the science experiments, I think, keep it more interesting. It adds that extra layer because you have a lot to decide for, like, what tiles you want and whether you're sending somebody out or you're using them at the base to be able to gain resources. And I think it's really clever how you gain resources with, like, just rotating the tiles. But the science experiments, not only could they maybe move your people on this part forward, but they might be able to reset the people at the base. So the timing of when you get those can get you an extra resource turn.
And there's other bits in play as well, because we are talking about how it's important of the tiles that you're getting and putting out. A big part of that is you've got these 3 goals that you're kind of fighting out over throughout the game. And often, well, at least 2 of those have to do with the tiles that you have out and where they're placed. And as soon as you get 1 more and whatever that goal is, you steal it from the other player. So if it starts at you need 3 diagonals, if you get 4 diagonals, you've got it. Then they need to get 5 diagonals to take it back. But those are worth 3 points each. So that's like a 6-point swing. In this game, our scores tend to be around the 40-point mark. So 6 points is an enormous difference in this game. So those are a big part of the interaction in this. And they really play a big role in what we do.
Yeah, we just had a game where you had to have 4 yellow tiles connected. We got up to 10. So we kept handing it backwards and forwards and backwards and forward and competing right to the very end for that tile. And that made the difference in the end.
Yeah, and I wasn't happy about that because Jess ended up winning by 2 points. So if that had gone the other way, it would have been 4 points for me. It was so close, and I'd never won this, so I almost won it. But let's talk a little bit about the replayability too, because that is kind of it's really the main point of variability, is you've got a bunch of those different scoring tiles, and those are going to make, a slightly different focus each time. Not a hugely different focus. It's going to be like, am I doing yellow tiles or blue tiles or green tiles? And are they going to be like a diagonal or straight across? So that's not going to have like the huge impact, but it does change things a little bit. And then there's also obviously the market, how things come out, and when the different science experiments and how that all works.
Yeah, and for the goals, there are 6 for each of the 3 sets. So that is enough of a difference. Like, I agree with you, though, that it's not a massive difference, but it does shift your focus a little bit. The market is certainly the biggest one. What the other players are doing as well, and if they're buying a lot of tiles and meaning you'll be able to go farther. There isn't like different player variability. So they have this great thing with the different stories for each of the different astronauts, but that doesn't correlate to having like a special power that you get to have in the game. Yeah,
each character, it's not asymmetric in any way, but it doesn't need to be. Like, basically, this is a tile placement game. This is a tile placement game that also has a market part of the game and competing for goals, which is in a lot of tile placement games. But it is a really clever tile placement game. I think perhaps the box and the presentation might lead people into thinking this is a little bit of a heavier game than it is. And this is very rules light. And I think that's one of the terrific things about it is we've got a rule book in French. Jess can mostly read French. I could read French if this was just about like grapefruit and how to get to the library, and otherwise I'm mostly lost, and that barely comes up in this rule book. But even with that, we printed out the English rules, we read them once, we've never needed to look at them again, because the back of these player boards has enough, and you need so little to remind you of every single thing that you need to do, because it's really just you're gaining resources, you're spending resources. And so it's it's a very easy teach, very, very simple game. But there is quite a bit of thinking in that. Like, we have some really thinky turns even within that light rule set.
Yeah, it is a really light rule set. It means we don't have to go back and look at a bunch of things and clarify things. But there are enough decisions. And one thing we hadn't mentioned too is the astronaut that you send out to get the tile. That tile has to go where that astronaut is.
Yeah.
So that's another decision of when they're coming back, is where you want them to go, because you're restricted to putting out a tile where they are as well. So between putting your astronauts out, choosing what tile you're getting, the different types of tiles, because there's enough different types between the resources, the research, and all of the science experiments and everything, it does lead to some interesting decisions. So even though it's really approachable and maybe lighter than a big experience, I think there's a lot of depth here as well.
And that science is an interesting thing too. So a part of the game as well is that you're trying to gather up the science to move up the science track, and then at the end of each age, you're scoring that science.
Well, that kind of brings us to player count, because the science track scores a little bit differently depending on the player count. At the end of each of the years, whoever is furthest ahead gets an extra point. So at 2 players, you get 2 points. At more than 2 players, you get the number of points for how many people are behind you. And so at 2 players, it's really a competition. So we're always going big on science.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of the big difference, because you use actually the same number of tiles regardless of the number of players. So it's really just going to be slightly lower scores in a 4-player game versus a 2-player game.
Yeah, because you'll have less tiles, so your base will be a bit smaller. I would imagine that at 3 players, you're probably each going to try and almost gun for one of these goals instead of competing as well, whereas at 2 they're pretty heavily contested. I feel like at higher player counts you'll just like really focus on getting
Maybe
at least
just
one.
Wrap one of them up. Yeah, we've only played this at 2.
Yeah.
So we are just kind of spitballing how we feel it might go at 3 or 4, but these are so important. I don't think you can get by without winning at least one of those. But at 2 players, you definitely can't get by without winning at least one of those.
Yeah, and likely it's the person who's won 2 of them that is going to be probably the winner in the end.
So let's talk about who this game is for. And this is a little bit of kind of a tweener kind of game, where it's a little bit light in terms of its rule set, but it looks like it's kind of a heavier game. But it does have like a fairly large decision space within the lightness of its rules. So it's a little bit hard to place who exactly is the audience.
Yeah, maybe would it qualify under that Gateway Plus category? Because it's maybe a little bit heavier than that. So I definitely wouldn't recommend it for brand new gamers. There is a lot of decisions, and I think it would just be that step too complicated. But if people have enjoyed some tile placement games, some resource management games, and they're looking for a bit of that next step, I think this is just really interesting with the resource management, the tile placement, and the market. So maybe along those lines, or for people who do like heavier games, who appreciate that lighter rule set, that playtime of an hour, being able to get a full rich game but in a short time, which I think is us. Like, we really like that sweet spot of an hour playtime, a light rule set, but still like a thinky puzzle.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of a nice gateway to, is those heavier, bigger decision-making games, because this does have that decision space. And it does have those kind of satisfying combos and like those smart plays where you've put your guy just a little bit out of the range of the arm, and then you've bought that experiment that brings him back so that he's going to get picked up by the arm, and then you get the other experiment that like lets you reset your other person. And I think that's great. And also that it isn't going to go so long, because you're only ever going to have 3 workers. So even if you manage like the perfect combo, you maybe get to do 5 actions, and probably 3 of those actions at least are just turning things.
Yeah.
So you're never going to be waiting that long for your turn.
Yeah, I also really appreciate that it just feels really positive. I don't get super frustrated. And I think part of that is if I can't buy a tile, and I have somebody on my base, I can always get resources. So there's always something I can do, even if it's just setting myself up for a future turn.
And I think also the theme is great. And it does kind of come out in it as well. And it's nice that, like, the tiles are nice, but also they're, like, functional. Like, these look like real science buildings, and they're just on, like, a dirt planet. And I kind of appreciate that it's, like, it's cool, and the science is cool, and it's got a little bit of that, like, Stanley Kubrick Space Odyssey feel to it a little bit, but it's not, like, outrageous. You can look at this and think, yeah, okay, maybe we could do that.
Yeah, and the components, too, are phenomenal. So if you like tile placement games, resource management, an interesting market system, this one could be worth checking out.
And that is it. That is Humanity.
Thank you so much for watching. Please let us know in the comments if you've played Humanity or what your favorite space tile placement game is. And as usual, please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.